In today's video, I'm going to be giving a 2-year update on my 180-gallon aquarium. In the video, I'm going to be walking through the full stock list of South American cichlids, showing their growth and some breeding that has happened over the last year. I'm also going to talk about the equipment that I use in this tank, the aquascape setup, and overall what I like about this tank and what I don't like. I'm also going to show how I do water changes, and just in general, try to answer every question I've gotten over the last 2 years that this tank has been running. Really excited to talk about it, so let's dive right in. So this 180-gallon aquarium is an acrylic tank that is 6 by 2 by 2 feet. The stand is oak black and it is 30 inches tall. And as mentioned, this has been running for 2 years now, as I ordered it online from fishtankdirect.com, and the tank and stand were delivered directly to my house 2 years ago today. My brothers were here to help me unbox the tank and get it down to my basement. One of the main reasons I went with an acrylic tank is because it's much lighter when the tank is empty than a glass tank would have been, and making it much easier to maneuver and get it down my stairwell and into my basement. It's literally the biggest tank that I could fit down here. It was a really fun day and video to shoot whenever we were setting up this tank for the first time. And I'll leave that down in the description if you'd like to see that or the 1-year update I did on this tank. But overall, things have gone really well with this tank and I'm really enjoying it so far. The one thing you'll notice about this tank right away is that its companion tank on the corner here has changed a few times over the last 2 years. It started off being a 75-gallon tank next to it, which was then traded out for a 48-gallon saltwater tank. I had that up and running for about 1.5 years, but I really wanted to switch back to freshwater because there's so much I want to keep on that side of the hobby. So I went with a 150-gallon custom aquarium, and together I just think these two tanks look incredible. So now we talked about how we got to present day, let's talk about the fish and the progression that they've had over the last 2 years. These are South American cichlids, and the majority of them are on the more peaceful end when it comes to the aggressive American cichlids you may hear about. In the last year, I've added 2 fish to this tank. About 1 year ago, I added my chocolate cichlid. This guy has really grown up and just looks incredible now with some great purple and emerald color, and it rivals my Oscar in this tank in terms of total size at about 11 or 12 inches. This guy's name is Bigfoot, and it's been a very enjoyable fish to keep in this tank so far. The second fish I added to this tank in the last year was about 3 or 4 months ago. I added my second red spot-gold severum, which was definitely the smallest fish in this tank at that time. I already had Big Red here, who has been growing up with me for about 4 years now. He was a little bit timid at the beginning, but has settled in really nicely in this tank. More to come on these two later on in the video. But in regards to the rest of the fish in this tank, I have 4 severums in here, 2 of which are red spot-gold severums. One is a turquoise severum, and one is a red shoulder severum. All of these guys were about the size of a quarter when I first got them, but I've had them all for years and watched them grow up into some pretty sizable adults at this point. I also have a 4-year-old electric blue acara in this tank, which was pretty small back when I had it in a 75-gallon tank, but it's really thrived in this 180, although it does hide out some when compared to other electric blue acaras, which are much more active swimmers. This guy just has a more shy personality in this tank. And then one of my favorite cichlids in this tank is the Geophagus tapajos. I currently have 7 of them. These guys have grown up together for over 3.5 years now. These guys have grown up together and colored up very nicely with some deep red on their heads and some cool blue coloration throughout their bodies, and red and blue in their tails as well. And then you probably have already noticed the really big Oscar cichlid. This is my Tiger Oscar Nessie, who is right at 2 years old now and probably is around 1 foot in length. It has an awesome personality. It's always front and center in the tank, always begging for food, always eyeing me down. It's just such a cool fish to keep, and I love the Oscar. People ask me all the time how I keep an Oscar with some of these smaller peaceful tank mates. The main thing was to let the other cichlids grow out for years before I introduced a smaller Oscar. Also, having a larger tank size definitely helps when keeping the Oscar from attacking any of its tank mates. It's always a risk and something I've monitored, but so far he's played very nicely for over 2 years. The one non-cichlid in this tank is my bala shark named Bruce. This is one of my favorite fish in the freshwater hobby, and I had to have one, and it fits perfectly in a 180. Many times bala sharks are recommended to be kept in groups, but mine has thrived as a solo fish with all these other cichlids. And just to round out the stocking with a few fish I don't talk about a lot, one is the Geophagus dindacneri. This is a female and it has more yellow coloration with some black markings in the body. The males will usually get a red hump on its head, but the female, as you can see, has a flat forehead and a little bit of red coloration there. And then I have my Satanoperca juripari here, which is about 4 years old as well, doing great in this tank. And then lastly, I have my black acara, which I don't show a ton. It has the same body shape as the electric blue acara, but it has tan coloration with a black stripe through it, and overall it's a pretty peaceful fish so far. And just really quickly, the one loss that I had in this tank over the last year was my true parrot cichlid. I gave an update in a video on this about 9 or 10 months ago, and this fish was just incredible. It got an external cut on its head that never got better, and unfortunately passed away. Its final measurement was about 11.5 inches, which kind of puts in context the size of the rest of this fish in this tank, as the size of the tank and the acrylic panels don't really do it justice in terms of showing the true size of some of these fish. So now that we talked about the stocking of this tank, let's talk about the 2 different cichlid pairs that have started breeding over the last year. So to start us off is a relatively recent update, which is my 2 red spot gold severums. I came back from a 9-day vacation and I found that these 2 paired off and were guarding the corner of this tank. They dug out a huge pit in the sand, which they had never done before, and they were guarding this area as if eggs had been laid. I haven't seen the eggs themselves as I can't get an angle back there, but they're either already been laid or about to be laid, and I can't wait to document that process if they are successful. Big Red has been such a peaceful severum, and it's even shown when they've been in breeding mode here, as it will gently nudge other cichlids away from this area rather than attacking them like you'll see in some cichlids as they start breeding. And that leads me to the last pair of cichlids that have started breeding in this tank, and that is my Geophagus tapajos. I did an update video about 3 or 4 months ago when I finally saw the pair lay eggs on a rock. I had seen breeding behavior in this tank quite a bit, I just never could catch it on camera, but I kept a very close eye on this pair for a few hours, and sure enough they laid eggs on this rock. I continued to keep a close eye on this, but I noticed that the eggs had disappeared. I tried to keep a close eye on them, ready to pull out the fry if I ever saw them in the tank. However, that time passed and I'm not sure exactly what happened, whether the parents ate the fry or other cichlids got to them. But another thing that I'm going to continue to monitor and document over time. I've considered pulling out a few of these pairs to have separate breeding projects, but I've had this group of 7 Geophagus tapajos together for about 4 years now, and I'd really hate to break up the band. So the breeding behavior is super cool to see, even though that's not what I intended in this tank. I'll definitely keep the channel posted as things progress in this tank and what my future plans might be. Another question I get asked a ton is what I feed my cichlids to keep them happy, healthy, and obviously colored up. It's very simple. I mostly stick to the extreme pellets and flakes. I absolutely love the krill flakes and the big fella pellets. They are perfect. I also mix in some monster pellets for my Oscar and my chocolate cichlid. It's a good mix that I usually feed about once a day, and then I'll usually mix in some frozen foods like brine shrimp or bloodworms once a week. But as I feed these guys, and especially the Oscar who's super messy, it does require a little extra maintenance and some water changes. So I get asked a ton about how I do water changes on this tank, and it's really easy. I start by adding the Cichlid Ultra Zero pump to the end of the Python hose, putting it into the tank and plugging it in. I highly recommend this pump because it drains the tank pretty quick, and you don't have to have your faucet running to create that siphon on the other end, so you're also saving water. And when the tank is draining, that's when I'll scrub off some algae from the decor or even from the acrylic panels. And it can be tricky with acrylic to scrub off algae without leaving scratches. I just use a shower scrubber that I ordered off Amazon for cheap. I'll leave that link in the description if you're looking for it. But this is really effective of getting the algae off the panels without scratching the acrylic. And with my water changes, I usually remove about 30% of my water every 7 to 10 days. That keeps my nitrates below 20 parts per million. Of course, every tank is different, so you may not need to do as much or as often, or you may need to do more. It just depends on the stocking in your tank, if you have live plants, and a lot of different factors. This is what works for me and keeps my water quality pristine and my fish healthy. So once the water is removed, then I just take off the pump, put the end of the python back on it, then put it back in and start filling the tank. I just make sure the temperature is roughly the same coming out of the faucet, and as the tap water is going into the tank, that's when I add my dechlorinator. Seachem Prime does a great job for me, and just as the tank is filling, that's when I add my prime, and I've never had a single issue doing it this way. I get a lot of questions about gravel vacuuming or sand vacuuming, and I really don't have to do that in this tank. The reasons for that are pretty simple. I have strong filters, I have good water flow with a wave maker, and I have a secret weapon with my geophagus who constantly sift through the sand, kicking up any uneaten food and detritus, which eventually goes into the filters. So as you can see, my sand is spotless, and I haven't sand vacced in over a year. And then the last part of my maintenance is cleaning out my canister filters, which I try to do once every 4 to 5 months, and that's been a good cadence for me. And speaking of those canister filters, let's talk about the equipment and what I use to run this tank. The majority of the time that this tank has been set up, I have had 2 FX6 canister filters. They worked extremely well, and they may have even been overkill for what I needed on this tank. However, one of those FX6 canisters gave me a lot of issues recently, and after cleaning it multiple times, trying to replace the impeller, which was another $70, I realized that the motor probably needed to be replaced, which was another $150 on Amazon. So I just decided to remove this canister filter altogether and try something different. My brother Alex set up a Cichlids whale canister and really liked it, so that's what I went with as the replacement. Here's the unboxing and setup of this Cichlids whale canister, which has been up and running on the tank for the last 3 months. It's been really quiet and it's been really effective. I really like this canister, and even though it's smaller and in terms of total power it's less than the FX6, it has worked really efficiently, and it's more than enough for a secondary filter on this tank. In terms of alignment of the trays, I have mechanical filtrations in the first 2, followed by the biological filtration, and then lastly I added ChemiPure Blue. I am a huge believer in ChemiPure Blue. It is how I keep my water so crystal clear. It's really the cherry on top of all the maintenance and everything else I do for this tank, but I do think it adds that extra layer of clarity, and I definitely recommend it if you're looking for something for your own tank. So I have the FX6 canister, I have the Cichlids Whale 500. I also have a Cichlids wave maker, which I'm a huge believer in. Wave makers have a lot of benefits to add to your aquarium. It can oxygenate your water if it's aimed towards the surface. It also can increase the efficiency of your filters if it's moving around the detritus in your tank, allowing for that to flow into your filters and let them do their job more effectively. And then my light is a Fluval Aquascape. It's nothing special, but it gives me exactly what I want in this tank. It's a perfect size for the 180. It's a really discreet, thin light, and I really love the Bluetooth controllability. I have a lot of these lights on my aquariums just so I can control all the lights from my app. One question I do get often is why I didn't go with a sump on this tank. At the time, I had canister filters that were already running on other tanks that were seated and ready to go, and I wanted to move the fish to this new tank on day 1 just because of some logistical reasons, and so those different seated canisters could easily go onto this tank and cycle it right away. So that really sums up the equipment I have on this tank. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but it's worked very well. So next, let's talk about the aquascape and why I set up the inside of the tank to look this way. So as mentioned, these are South American cichlids, and in their natural environment they usually have sand, driftwood, rocks, and plants, but most of these cichlids would tear up any plants, so as I mentioned, I went with fake plants in this case. The big pieces of driftwood are weighted down by a couple slate pieces, and I really like these for the aesthetic, but also to provide line of sight breaks whenever there is aggression. Another one of the main questions I get about this tank is the sand that I went with. It is Carib Sea Sunset Gold sand, and I love it because it's very natural and because some of the fish in this tank require a sand substrate. But overall, I'm very happy how this aquascape turned out and how the fish have interacted with it over time. So next, let's talk about the tank review. Do I like this tank? Would I change anything about it? And overall, the answer is no. I still really love this tank, and I don't think I would change much about it. The biggest con of this tank is definitely being so careful about scratching the acrylic. I do have a few scratches that do drive me nuts, even though they're minimal. I'm just a bit OCD about that. But once I got the 150 custom aquarium, I just love glass tanks. And so I think if I didn't have that limitation of the stairwell, I probably would go glass. In terms of the stocking of this tank, I absolutely love it. I don't think I'm going to change anything about it. I'm just going to watch some of the breeding behavior over time and see if there's any times that I actually need to intervene. Probably the one thing I would change about this tank is adding a sump instead of the 2 canisters, but as I mentioned, the canisters do a great job and they're quiet, so now that it's out up and running, the only thing I really have to worry about is cleaning those canisters, which I don't love to do. But overall, I can say that this 180-gallon tank is still my dream aquarium. It's the biggest tank that I could possibly fit down here. I love the stocking and how it all came together. It was almost like it was meant to be. I really enjoyed talking about this tank, so if you have any other further questions that I didn't cover today, make sure you leave those down in the description below. And lastly, if you could like the video or consider subscribing, we would really appreciate the support. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.